There is a voice in your head that claims to be you. It narrates your life, it tells you what you like, what you hate, and who you are supposed to be. It claims to be the master of your house. But what if that voice is actually a usurper? What if the I you identify with is not the master, but a blind jailer keeping you trapped in a psychological prison of its own making? We often speak of the matrix as something out there, a societal construct or a technological simulation. But the true matrix is far closer. It is the very structure of your conscious mind. Carl Jung discovered something terrifying about the human psyche that ancient Gnostics knew 2,000 years ago. The entity you call yourself, your ego, is structurally identical to the Gnostic Demiurge, a false god that creates a limited, distorted world and demands you worship it. This entity locks you in a cycle of repetition, fear, and limited awareness. Today, we are going to dismantle that prison. We are going to look at the architecture of your own mind to understand how the false god operates, and more importantly, how to escape. Welcome. If you follow this channel, you know we often explore the Gnostic soul trap and the nature of reality. But today we are taking those cosmic concepts and turning them inward. We are applying the Hermetic maxim, as above, so below. To understand why you feel stuck, anxious or disconnected, we have to look at one of the most profound parallels in comparative mythology: the link between the Gnostic Demiurge and the Jungian ego. To understand this, we first need to define our terms. In Gnostic cosmology, the Demiurge, often named Yaldabaoth, is a blind, ignorant creator god. He is born in error, separated from the true, divine fullness known as the Pleroma. Because he is cut off from the source, he thinks he is the only god that exists. He creates the material world, a flawed, restrictive copy of the divine realm, and traps the divine spark, the human soul, inside it to power his creation. For centuries, this was viewed purely as a theological myth, a story about the cosmos. But Carl Jung, who was deeply influenced by Gnostic texts like the Nag Hammadi library, saw this myth not just as theology, but as psychology. He realized that the human ego functions exactly like this demiurge. The ego is a small, separated complex of consciousness that believes it is the whole personality. It builds a mental simulation, a prison of concepts, labels and defenses, and traps the true self within it. Jung famously said, "The psychological rule says that when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate." This means that if you do not recognize the demiurge within your own mind, you will forever be a slave to external circumstances. You will believe you are fighting the world, when in reality you are fighting the projection of your own blind ego. The Gnostics didn't just warn us about a cosmic tyrant, they warned us about the tyrant in our own heads. Let's examine the primary trait of the demiurge: ignorance. In the Apocryphon of John, the demiurge declares, "I am God, and there is no other God beside me." The Gnostics called him Samael, the god of the blind, or Saklas, the fool. He isn't necessarily pure evil in the cartoonish sense. He is fundamentally blind to the reality that exists above him. He literally cannot see the Pleroma, the divine totality from which he emerged. Now, look at the ego. The ego is the center of your conscious field. It is the part of you that says, I. And just like Yaldabaoth, the ego suffers from a fundamental delusion of grandeur. It believes it is the master of the psyche. It believes that what it knows, what it plans, and what it perceives is the totality of reality. We live in a society that celebrates the ego. We are taught to strengthen it, to polish it, to build our personal brand. But when you say, "I am in control of my life," that is the Demiurge speaking. The ego is unaware of the vast oceanic depths of the unconscious mind that actually drive your behaviors, your desires, and your fate. Jung called this inflation. It is the arrogance of the part claiming to be the whole. Think about the rational mind. It loves to categorize. It loves to label things as good or bad, right or wrong. It creates a simulation of the world that is safe and predictable. But this simulation is not reality. It is a map, and a very poor one at that. Consider how the ego behaves when it is challenged. When reality contradicts your self-image, or when a deeper emotion bubbles up from the unconscious, what does the ego do? It denies it. It represses it. It says, "That is not me." Just as the Demiurge refuses to acknowledge the higher aeons or the Divine Mother Sophia, the ego refuses to acknowledge the shadow. This is the first bar of the prison cell, the delusion of supremacy. As long as the ego believes it is the only authority, you remain cut off from the true source of your power, which Jung called the self. You are ruled by a blind king who would rather burn the kingdom down than admit he doesn't know how to rule. This is why we self-sabotage. The ego would rather fail on its own terms than succeed by surrendering to a higher power within the psyche. If the ego is the Demiurge, then what is the prison? In Gnosticism, the Demiurge creates the kenoma, the emptiness, the material world composed of heavy, dense matter designed to keep the spirit weighed down. To maintain this prison, he creates servants called ARCHONS. These are the rulers, the wardens of the planetary spheres, who block the soul's ascent. They stand at the gates of each dimension, demanding passwords and feeding on the soul's fear. Psychologically, this is a perfect map of your neuroses. The ego creates a model of reality based on survival, social conditioning, and trauma. This mental model is your personal kenoma. It is a contracted, limited version of life where possibility is suffocated. And the archons? In Jungian psychology, these are your autonomous complexes. These are the rigid behavioral patterns, the automatic negative thoughts, and the defense mechanisms that guard the boundaries of your ego. Think about a time you tried to change a habit or expand your consciousness. You felt resistance, didn't you? You felt a sudden, irrational wave of fear, guilt, or apathy. That is an archon. That is a psychological complex acting on behalf of the ego Demiurge to keep you within the known boundaries. The Gnostics taught that the archons feed on our louche, our emotional energy, particularly fear, anxiety, and suffering. Psychologically, this is undeniably true. Your complexes and neuroses are living energetic systems. They feed on your attention. Let's look at the victim complex as an archon. If you have a victim complex, it acts like a parasite. It filters your reality so that you only see evidence of how the world is hurting you. It triggers emotional reactions that make you feel small and powerless. And what happens? You obsess over it. You replay the arguments in your head. You feed it energy. The more you engage with the limited narrative of the ego, the stronger those neural pathways become. The archon gets fat on your misery. The ego builds this prison because it fears the chaos of the unknown. It fears the unconscious. So it creates a sanitized small world of shoulds and musts, a binary world of success versus failure. It traps the divine spark, your potential for wholeness, inside a rigid identity. You forget you are a vast, multidimensional being and start believing you are just an accountant, or just a failure, or just a body. You become the character in the Demiurge's story, forgetting you are the actor. But what lies outside the prison? This is where the parallel offers us hope. In Gnosticism, beyond the Demiurge and his Archons lies the Pleroma, the fullness. This is the realm of the true alien God, the source of all light and spirit. It is total, integrated and perfect. It is the place where opposites are united. In Jung's model, this corresponds to the self, capital S. The self is the centre and circumference of the entire psyche. It includes the conscious and the unconscious, the light and the dark, the masculine and the feminine. It is the imago Dei, the image of God within the human soul. The tragedy of the human condition, according to both Gnostics and Jung, is the separation between the ignorant centre, the ego or demiurge, and the true centre, the self or Pleroma. Now, it is important to understand that the ego is not bad in the sense that it needs to be destroyed utterly. The ego is a necessary organ. It is needed to navigate three-dimensional reality, just as the demiurge was necessary to craft the material world so that the spirit could experience it. The problem isn't that the ego exists. The problem is that it has forgotten its origin. It has severed the connection. It thinks it is the boss. When Jung speaks of the God image in the psyche, he is referring to that spark of the Pleroma that resides in the darkness of the body. The Gnostics called this pneuma, spirit. The ego tries to suppress this spirit because the spirit is wild. The spirit is unpredictable. The spirit demands growth, change, and the death of the old ways. The ego wants safety. The self wants wholeness. And because these two goals are often opposed, we experience internal conflict. We feel a longing for something more, a nostalgia for a home we've never visited. That is the signal from the Pleroma. That is the self calling out to the ego, trying to wake it up from its fever dream of control. If you ignore this call, the self will turn against the ego. This is what we call a midlife crisis, a breakdown, or a dark night of the soul. It is the Pleroma shattering the walls of the Demiurge's prison to let the light in. So, how do we escape? We do not escape by dying physically. In Gnosticism, if you die without gnosis, without knowledge, you are simply recycled by the Archons. You are sent back into the prison. Similarly, in psychology, you cannot destroy the ego. Jung warned that destroying the ego leads to psychosis, being overwhelmed by the unconscious waters. The solution is gnosis. But understand this, gnosis is not intellectual knowledge. You cannot read your way out of the prison. You cannot think your way out, because thinking is the tool of the demiurge. Gnosis is direct experiential knowledge of the heart. In Jungian terms, this is the process of individuation. It is the long, difficult work of making the unconscious conscious. It is the process of the ego realizing it is not the master. To escape the mental prison, the ego must undergo a death. Not a literal death, but a relativization. It must step down from the throne. It must recognize that it is a servant of the self, not the master of the house. You must stop worshipping the demiurge in your head. You must stop believing every thought that passes through your mind is absolute truth. This requires shadow work. You must face the archons, your complexes, your dark impulses, your shame, and integrate them. You stop feeding them with fear and start feeding them with awareness. When you shine the light of consciousness on a complex, it loses its autonomy. The archon loses its power. When you observe your thoughts without identifying with them, you are practicing gnosis. You are seeing the machinery. You are realizing, I am not the thinker. I am the one observing the thinker. In that moment of seeing, the crack in the prison wall appears. You are no longer the blind creator. You are the awakened spirit. The Gnostic myth is not just ancient history, it is a map of your current psychological reality. You have a false god living in your head, building walls out of fear and calling it safety. But you also have a spark of the infinite Pleroma waiting to be acknowledged. The path of the Gnostic and the path of the Jungian analyst are the same. To depose the blind tyrant, to face the archons of your own complexes, and to reconnect with the true self. It is the hardest work you will ever do, but it is the only work that leads to true freedom. If you want to go deeper into the architecture of this reality and how to navigate it, make sure you are subscribed to this channel. We are building a community of those seeking the exit door. Leave a comment below. In what ways do you feel your own ego acting like the Demiurge, limiting your potential? Let's discuss the prison break in the comments. Thank you for watching.